Ma'am, the charity center is down the street. This building isn't for people like you.
A young white receptionist laughed as a 70-year-old black woman in a wheelchair sat quietly in the lobby of a powerful financial company. Nobody knew she had waited 20 years for this day. 20 years earlier, her husband uncovered a dangerous secret hidden inside this very building, then mysteriously died before he could expose it. Now she's back, and before this day is over, powerful executives will panic, federal investigators will arrive, and a decades-long cover-up will begin to collapse. Stay until the end, because the woman they mocked came back to finish what her husband started. A cold March wind swept through downtown Boston as morning light reflected off the glass towers along Federal Street. At 7 o'clock sharp, the city was only beginning to wake up, but some stories had already begun changing lives. Eleanor Brooks adjusted the wool blanket resting across her knees as she slowly guided her wheelchair toward the entrance of Sterling Financial Group. At 70 years old, Eleanor was not someone people noticed twice. In fact, most people never noticed her at all. She was an African-American woman with deep brown skin and gentle eyes that carried decades of quiet wisdom. Thin silver curls framed her face beneath a knitted dark gray hat. Her posture remained dignified despite age and hardship. Fine lines around her eyes spoke of countless smiles. But there was also something else hidden there, something heavy that life had taught her to carry without complaint. She wore an old gray coat, slightly faded at the sleeves, and a pair of black leather gloves that had clearly been repaired more than once. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth. Nothing about her appearance suggested power. That was exactly the point. She paused at the foot of the wheelchair ramp and frowned. A large promotional sign advertising an investment conference had been carelessly placed right in the middle of the accessible pathway. She looked at it for a moment. Then she quietly moved it aside herself. Nobody offered help. Nobody even looked up. Years ago, that would have hurt her feelings. Now it simply gave her information. She entered the lobby. The room was enormous, elegant, and intimidating. White marble floors stretched beneath a massive chandelier, while expensive artwork decorated the walls. A waterfall installation created a peaceful atmosphere that almost succeeded in hiding the coldness inside the building. Almost. Eleanor noticed everything. The employees only greeted people wearing expensive suits. A janitor pushing a cleaning cart was ignored. An elderly man asking for directions had to repeat himself twice before someone answered. And every camera in the lobby was recording. Good, she thought. Very good. Behind the reception desk stood Jason Miller, 28 years old, white, 6 feet tall, athletic build, neatly trimmed blonde hair, and sharp blue eyes that usually appeared friendly to important clients. He had a square jawline and a polished smile he had practiced for years. People generally liked Jason, but liking someone and truly knowing them were two very different things. Jason had grown up believing appearance was everything. His father had spent years drilling one lesson into him. Successful people looked successful. Weak people looked weak. Poor people stayed poor because they made bad decisions. Over time, Jason stopped questioning those ideas. They simply became part of him. This lobby was his kingdom, and he believed it was his job to protect it. He glanced up, then immediately sighed. Another problem. At least that's what he thought. Eleanor rolled toward the desk. "Good morning," she said softly. "My name is Eleanor Brooks. I have an 8:30 meeting with the board of directors." Jason blinked, then smiled. Not a kind smile. The kind of smile adults use when they think someone is confused. "Ma'am, are you sure you're at the right building?" "Yes. The Community Assistance Center is a few blocks away." Eleanor remained calm. "No, thank you. Sterling Financial Group, 8:30. Jason leaned back in his chair. Several young associates nearby had already started paying attention. One even smirked. Jason folded his hands. "Ma'am, the board of directors doesn't usually schedule meetings with walk-in visitors. I have an appointment." "With the board?" "Yes." The young associates laughed quietly. Eleanor noticed. She noticed everything, but she also noticed something else. Nobody here seemed intentionally cruel at first. It was almost worse. Cruelty had become normal. Jason pointed toward her folder. "What do you have there? My documents. Mind if I see them?" Eleanor extended the folder. Jason took it but never opened it. Instead, he examined her coat, her gloves, and her wheelchair. He had already made his decision. The documents no longer mattered. That was how prejudice worked. People reached conclusions first and looked for evidence later. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't allow unauthorized visitors upstairs." "Could you check the appointment list?" Jason chuckled. "I don't think that's necessary. It would only take a minute. Ma'am, trust me." "No," Eleanor said gently. "Trust the list." Something about her answer irritated him. She wasn't arguing, she wasn't angry, she was reasonable. Reasonable people were difficult to dismiss. He stood up. The associates nearby turned toward them. Jason suddenly felt like he had an audience, and people often become different when they have an audience. He picked up her folder. Then, with exaggerated clumsiness, he let it slip from his hands. Papers scattered across the marble floor. Several people gasped. A few laughed. Nobody moved. For a moment, Eleanor simply stared at the pages. 20 years ago, she might have cried. 10 years ago, she might have yelled. Today, she only took a slow breath. She bent over to collect them one by one. Reach, strain, lift, reach again. Her shoulders ached, but she kept her expression calm. Because she had learned something a long time ago. Strangers often watched for weakness. She refused to give them a performance. A young coffee attendant nearby hesitated before taking one step forward. She was Emily Carter, 24 years old, a petite woman with light brown skin and curly dark hair tied into a bun. She had kind eyes and a naturally compassionate personality that often got her into trouble at work because she could never ignore people who needed help. Before she could move further, Jason spoke. "Stay where you are." Emily froze. Eleanor finally gathered the last paper. Then she looked up, directly at Jason. Her voice was quiet, but somehow every person in the lobby heard her. "You will remember this morning for a very long time." The associates burst into laughter. Jason laughed too. "Is that a threat?" "No." "Then what is it?" "A fact." He shook his head. "Security." A large man approached from across the lobby. His name was Marcus Reed, 58 years old, an African-American security guard with broad shoulders, short gray hair, and a calm face that life had taught to observe before judging. 20 years in military service had made him patient, but years of working corporate jobs had also taught him that questioning authority could be dangerous. He walked toward Eleanor. Something immediately felt wrong. She didn't look lost. She didn't look dangerous. She looked like someone waiting for an appointment. Still, he had a job to do. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Eleanor looked up at him. "What is your name?" "Marcus Reed." She nodded. "Thank you, Marcus." Then she folded her hands over her lap. Jason rolled his eyes. "Please escort her outside." Marcus slowly stepped behind the wheelchair. His hands hovered over the handles. And then it happened. 38 floors above them, inside a conference room, a senior executive suddenly turned pale while staring at a visitor registry. His chair scraped violently against the floor. He ran toward the elevator. Downstairs, Marcus's fingers had just touched the handles of Eleanor's wheelchair when a distant voice echoed across the lobby. "Stop!" Every head turned. The executive sprinted across the marble floor, his strip completely drained of color. Then he shouted the words that made the entire lobby freeze. "Don't touch her." Absolutely nobody touches her. The lobby remained silent for several seconds after the executive shouted. It was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of indifference. The silence of fear. Every person standing in that room suddenly understood they had misjudged something very important. Eleanor Brooks remained exactly where she was. Her hands rested peacefully on her lap. Her expression did not change. 20 years had taught her that truth often arrived later than justice. But when it finally arrived, it tended to arrive all at once. The executive hurried toward her. His name was Benjamin Harper. Benjamin was a 62-year-old white man with thinning silver hair, a narrow face, and thoughtful green eyes hidden behind rectangular glasses. He was tall but slightly stooped from years of working long hours behind conference tables and financial reports. Unlike many executives, Benjamin was known for his humility. 25 years earlier, he had started at Sterling Financial as a junior analyst and slowly climbed the ranks through honesty rather than ambition. He stopped in front of Eleanor and bent down to her eye level. "Mrs. Brooks, I am deeply sorry." The entire lobby stared. Jason Miller suddenly felt cold. He looked from Benjamin to Eleanor and back again. His stomach tightened. Benjamin stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eleanor Brooks." He paused. "The founder of Brooks Legacy Partners and one of the largest private investors in the country." Nobody moved. Even the waterfall seemed louder now. Jason swallowed hard. His face had turned pale. "Sir, there must be some mistake." Benjamin looked at him. He spoke softly. Sometimes soft voices were far more frightening than loud ones. Eleanor finally spoke. "There is no need to panic." Everyone looked at her. "I came here to learn." That answer confused almost everyone. Learn? What did that mean? Benjamin escorted her toward a private elevator. As they entered, Eleanor glanced one last time toward the lobby. She noticed Emily standing quietly behind the coffee counter. The young woman looked embarrassed for everyone else. Eleanor offered her a small smile. Emily smiled back. That simple exchange felt more genuine than anything else that had happened all morning. The elevator doors closed. As they rose toward the 38th floor, Boston slowly unfolded beneath them. Eleanor stared through the glass. 20 years. 20 years was enough time for grief to become routine, long enough for pain to stop screaming and begin whispering, long enough to build an entirely new life, but never long enough to forget. Benjamin stood beside her. He finally broke the silence. "Mrs. Brooks, I never thought I'd see you back here. I never thought I would return. You stayed away all this time, not completely." Benjamin looked at her. "What do you mean? I've been watching." That answer made him uneasy, because somehow he believed her. The elevator opened. The boardroom was enormous, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Several directors immediately stood up. Eleanor noticed their nervous expressions. She noticed everything. She always had. There was a time when she had been different, before tragedy, before loss, before Samuel. Her eyes drifted toward a framed photograph hanging on the wall. Sterling Financial 20 years earlier. There he was, Samuel Brooks, her husband. Samuel had been an African-American financial analyst with an athletic build, dark brown skin, intelligent hazel eyes, and a calm personality that made people trust him instantly. He wore a neatly trimmed beard and always carried himself with quiet confidence. He never chased promotions, never sought attention, and rarely spoke louder than necessary. But Samuel possessed something dangerous: integrity. He believed rules should apply equally to everyone. 20 years ago, that belief had made him powerful, and then it had made him vulnerable. Eleanor remembered that final month. He had come home every night looking exhausted. At first, she assumed he was simply overworked. Then she noticed him locking his office door at home. She noticed him writing notes by hand instead of using his computer. She noticed him becoming careful, too careful. One evening, he had sat beside her on their porch. The spring air had been warm. He had looked nervous. She had never seen him nervous before. "If anything happens to me," he said quietly, "don't believe what they tell you." She laughed then. She thought he was joking. She regretted that laugh for 20 years. 3 weeks later, he died. Police called it an accident. A truck ran a red light. Case closed. Too simple, far too simple. She never believed it. She hired investigators. Nothing. She hired another team. Nothing. Every trail disappeared. Every witness forgot. Every document vanished. Over time, she realized something terrifying. This wasn't one person's secret. It was an entire system protecting itself. And today she was back inside that system. Benjamin interrupted her thoughts. "There have been irregularities." She turned toward him. "How long?" He hesitated. 4 years that we know of." She nodded. "Longer." His eyes widened. "You think so?" "I know so." The room fell quiet. She reached inside her folder. Everyone expected contracts. Everyone expected legal documents. Instead, she pulled out an old photograph. It showed Samuel standing in front of Sterling Financial 20 years earlier. She placed it in the center of the table. Then she spoke. "I am not here because I bought influence." Nobody said a word. "I am here because 20 years ago my husband discovered something inside this building." She paused. The room suddenly felt smaller, and before he could tell the world, her voice softened. "He died." Nobody breathed. She continued. "For 20 years I've been searching for the truth." Then she looked directly at every person around that table, and I believe that truth is still sitting somewhere inside this building. Several directors shifted uncomfortably. One avoided eye contact entirely. Eleanor noticed. She noticed everything. Outside, snow began falling over Boston again. The city carried on as if nothing unusual were happening. But inside Sterling Financial, something had already changed. 20 years of silence had officially ended. And somewhere else inside the building, a man Eleanor had not yet met was already deleting files from his computer. By noon, a light snow continued to fall over Boston, but inside Sterling Financial, something else was beginning to melt. Fear. Not loud fear, the quiet kind. The kind that moved from office to office without anyone speaking a word. Eleanor Brooks had spent 20 years learning one important lesson. Most people never destroyed themselves all at once. They did it slowly, one compromise at a time, until lying became easier than telling the truth. She sat inside a temporary office Benjamin Harper had prepared for her. The room overlooked the harbor. Cargo ships moved silently across the water while the city carried on as if nothing unusual was happening. But Eleanor knew otherwise. Somewhere inside this building, a person had been hiding secrets for 2 decades. She simply needed patience. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Emily Carter stepped inside. The young woman still wore her green apron from the coffee bar. Her dark curls had loosened throughout the morning, and nervousness filled her gentle eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mrs. Brooks." "You aren't bothering me." Emily hesitated. "I think I may have something." Eleanor smiled. "Then sit down." Emily sat across from her. "I've worked here for 3 years," she said. "I've seen things that never felt right." "What kind of things?" Emily lowered her voice. "Boxes." Eleanor tilted her head. "Boxes? Every month, late at night. Who moved them?" Emily swallowed. "The same people every time." "Did you recognize them?" "Not all of them, but one person was always involved." She opened her phone. There was a photograph. An older man stood near a freight elevator. Eleanor immediately recognized him. Richard Evans. Her fingers tightened slightly. Richard Evans was 58 years old, white, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with neatly combed silver hair and an expensive tailored suit that never had a wrinkle. He kept a short salt and pepper beard trimmed to perfection and carried himself with quiet authority. Most employees described him as polite and sophisticated. That was his greatest strength. People trusted him. For years, Richard had donated to hospitals, attended charity events, and sponsored scholarships throughout Massachusetts. He had built a reputation that protected him. 20 years ago, Samuel had once mentioned his name, only once. That memory suddenly returned. Samuel had been sitting at their kitchen table. He looked worried. He said, "Sometimes the nicest man in the room is the one you should fear the most." At the time, Eleanor never asked who he meant. Today, she knew. Benjamin entered the room carrying several old archive folders. "I found these in storage." Eleanor opened them. Most contained ordinary reports. Then she stopped, her breathing slowed. 20 years ago, Samuel's name. Dozens of handwritten notes filled the margins. Arrows connected numbers, accounts, transfers, dates, patterns. Samuel had been building a case. He wasn't investigating one crime. He was investigating an entire machine. The money wasn't disappearing randomly. It was being redirected. Every few years, funds intended for community programs were quietly rerouted into shell organizations. Then those organizations vanished, over and over. For 20 years, Benjamin sat down heavily. "My God," Eleanor nodded. He was getting close. Benjamin rubbed his forehead. Too close. At that same moment on the opposite side of the building, Richard Evans sat inside his office. His office was immaculate, too immaculate. Nothing personal decorated the room except one family photograph. People who visited often described him as disciplined. The truth was simpler. He controlled everything around him because he was terrified of losing control. His computer screen flashed. Video views, 1.3 million. The video from the lobby was spreading across social media. Jason Miller humiliating Eleanor. The entire country was watching. Richard closed the window immediately. He wasn't worried about Jason. Jason was disposable. He was worried because public attention brought questions. Questions brought investigators. Investigators brought danger. His phone rang. "Jason," Richard answered. "Sir, I swear I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. Am I being fired?" Richard leaned back calmly. "Jason, listen to me carefully. Don't talk to reporters. Don't talk to anyone." Jason exhaled in relief. "Okay. And if anyone asks questions about me," he paused. "You've never seen me." The line went silent. Jason suddenly felt afraid. For the first time that day, he realized something. His mistake this morning wasn't simply insulting a powerful woman. He had accidentally stepped into a war that started 20 years ago. Back upstairs, Eleanor was studying another file. Then she found something that made her heart skip. A parking receipt, dated 3 days before Samuel died. Location, Sterling Financial Underground Garage. Time, 11:47 p.m. Samuel had come back to the building in secret. Why? She kept digging. Then she found a single handwritten sentence. Her husband's handwriting. Very neat, very careful. "If something happens to me, Richard already knows I found it." Eleanor closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she wasn't a billionaire investor. She wasn't a powerful woman. She was a widow again, a wife, a person who had spent 20 years wondering if she could have saved him. She inhaled slowly, then opened her eyes. That version of herself was gone now. The woman sitting here today had learned something grief teaches only a few people. You cannot change yesterday, but you can stop tomorrow from repeating it. She handed the note to Benjamin. "We're not dealing with corruption anymore." Benjamin looked at her. "What are we dealing with?" She stared toward the city skyline. A man who spent 20 years making sure nobody ever learned the truth. At that exact moment, Richard Evans opened a locked drawer in his office. Inside sat a small black key. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he whispered to himself, "No one can ever find the storage room." And for the first time in 20 years, Richard Evans was afraid. By late afternoon, Sterling Financial no longer felt like a company. It felt like a house that had just discovered termites inside its walls. Everyone could sense something was wrong. Nobody knew how bad it truly was. Snow continued falling over Boston as Eleanor Brooks sat quietly in her temporary office, staring at the harbor. 20 years of searching had taught her another painful lesson. The truth rarely arrived as one giant revelation. It arrived in fragments, and every fragment demanded courage. There was a knock at the door. Benjamin Harper stepped inside. He was carrying a dusty cardboard box. This was found in an old archive room. Eleanor immediately sat up. A small handwritten label rested on the side. Samuel Brooks. Her breath paused for a moment. 20 years. 20 years, and somehow this box had survived. Benjamin carefully placed it on the table. Eleanor touched the edges with her fingertips before opening it. Inside were several notebooks, a leather journal, photocopies of financial transfers, and at the very bottom, hidden beneath old folders, sat a small silver USB drive. Benjamin exhaled slowly. My God! Eleanor didn't answer. She opened the journal first. Samuel's handwriting instantly brought her back in time. She could almost hear his voice. She remembered him sitting at their dining room table every night after work. He would always organize his notes before going to bed because he hated unfinished thoughts. One page caught her attention. People are not stealing money. They are stealing time. Time from families. Time from communities. Time from future generations. She smiled sadly. That sounded exactly like him. Then she turned another page. Richard is not acting alone. That sentence made her stop. She kept reading. There are others protecting him. If one person disappears, another takes over. This system is older than I thought. Benjamin looked uneasy. This is much bigger than corruption. Eleanor nodded. It's a culture. Before she could continue, Emily rushed into the office. Her eyes were wide. The video just passed 6 million views. Eleanor looked at her. The lobby video? Emily nodded. It's everywhere now. Television stations are replaying it. Meanwhile, downstairs, reporters had begun gathering outside the building. Inside his office, Richard Evans was slowly losing control. His hands remained calm. His face remained calm. But his thoughts were no longer calm. For 20 years, he had built his life around certainty. Certainty that nobody would ever connect all the pieces. Certainty that everyone had a price. Certainty that fear was stronger than honesty. Today, for the first time, those certainties were cracking. His office phone rang. Jason Miller. Richard answered. Jason sounded completely different now. No arrogance, no confidence, only fear. You lied to me. Richard stayed silent. You knew who she was. Still silence. Jason continued. You used me. Richard leaned back. Jason, everyone makes choices. Jason laughed bitterly. No, you made choices I was just stupid enough to follow. Then he hung up. Richard frowned. That was dangerous. People who felt betrayed often became unpredictable. Downstairs, Jason sat alone in an empty conference room. He looked exhausted. His perfectly styled blonde hair was now messy. Dark circles had formed under his eyes. One day it changed him. Sometimes humiliation teaches lessons pride never can. The door opened. Eleanor entered. Jason immediately stood. I'm sorry. She nodded. I know. His eyes widened. You do? Yes. He looked confused. Then why aren't you angry? Eleanor sat across from him. Because anger isn't useful anymore. Jason lowered his head. I didn't know any of this. No. You hate me. No. He looked up. Why not? She smiled gently. Because hateful people don't become hateful overnight. Someone taught you that appearances determine a person's value. Jason sat silently, because she was right. His father, his upbringing, his assumptions. Everything suddenly looked different. Then he spoke. I want to help. Eleanor studied him for several seconds. Then she nodded. Good. Jason swallowed. There is something. He leaned closer. Every month Richard goes somewhere nobody else can access. Where? I don't know. But he always carries a black key. Eleanor's eyes shifted. The same key Richard had been staring at earlier. Everything was beginning to connect. At that exact moment, another person arrived. Margaret Sullivan, 74 years old, was the longest-serving employee at Sterling Financial. She was a petite white woman with short silver hair and kind blue eyes. She had spent 40 years working in records management before retiring 6 months earlier. Margaret was known for remembering everything because she believed organizations had memories just like people did. She entered carrying another envelope. I found this. Eleanor opened it. Inside was a printed building map. One section had been circled. Sub-basement storage room B, restricted access. Margaret spoke quietly. Samuel came to see me 3 days before he died. Everyone froze. He asked me to keep this safe. Eleanor slowly lifted her head. What did he say? Margaret smiled sadly. He said someday a woman stronger than all of us would come back for the truth. The room became silent. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears for the first time all day. Not because she was weak. Because after 20 years, she was no longer carrying this burden alone. She placed the silver USB drive beside the map. Everyone expected her to plug it in. Everyone expected immediate answers. She didn't. Instead, she carefully put it back inside the box. Benjamin looked surprised. We're not opening it? No. Why not? Eleanor stared toward the conference hall visible through the glass walls. Because tomorrow, every employee will be there. She placed her hand over Samuel's journal. And when the truth comes out, everyone who helped hide it will hear it together. At that exact moment, several floors below, Richard Evans opened his laptop. Then his face lost all color. A notification had appeared. Federal investigators had officially requested access to Sterling Financial's internal records. And for the first time in 20 years, Richard Evans realized he was running out of time. The next morning, Boston woke up under a blanket of fresh snow. Inside Sterling Financial, hundreds of employees filled the main conference hall. Nobody was talking. Reporters lined the back rows. Cameras pointed toward the stage. Federal investigators stood quietly near the exits. Everyone knew something enormous was about to happen. Eleanor Brooks sat at the center of the stage beside a photograph of Samuel Brooks. She wore the same gray coat she had worn the day before. She had intentionally chosen not to wear expensive clothes, because this was never about power. It was about truth. Benjamin Harper approached the podium. "We are here today because 20 years ago, someone tried to bury the truth." He looked toward Eleanor, and because one woman refused to let them succeed. The room fell silent. Eleanor rolled herself forward. Her silver curls reflected the stage lights. For a moment, she simply looked at everyone. Then she held up the silver USB drive. 20 years ago, my husband trusted that someone would eventually finish what he started. She inserted the drive into the computer. The room went dark. Samuel's voice filled the speakers. A collective gasp spread through the audience. His voice was calm, steady, exactly as Eleanor remembered. "If you're listening to this, I may no longer be here, but the truth must continue." The room remained completely still. Samuel continued. "I discovered a network that has been stealing from this company for years. Not just money, opportunity, education, healthcare grants, community programs." Images appeared on the giant screen, transaction after transaction, thousands of pages, millions of dollars, shell companies, fake organizations. Samuel spoke again. "The leader is Richard Evans, but he isn't alone. He built a system that rewards silence and punishes honesty." Every employee slowly turned toward Richard. He sat frozen in his chair. His face had become gray. Then another recording appeared. 3 days before his death, Samuel had secretly recorded a meeting. Richard's voice echoed throughout the room. "If he keeps digging, he'll become a problem." Several employees covered their mouths. Some began crying. Others simply stared in disbelief. For 20 years, the man they trusted had been orchestrating a deception. Richard suddenly stood up. "This proves nothing." Nobody answered. Then Eleanor spoke. "No, Richard." She opened another folder. "This does." Federal investigators immediately stepped forward. One of them approached the stage. His name was Daniel Cooper, a 50-year-old federal investigator with dark brown hair, streaked with gray, and a square jaw covered with light stubble. He had spent 27 years investigating financial crimes and had developed a reputation for remaining calm under pressure. He opened a folder. "Richard Evans, you are under federal investigation for conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and destruction of evidence." Richard backed away. No, this isn't happening." Daniel nodded toward 2 agents. Richard was escorted out of the room. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Because real justice rarely feels triumphant. Sometimes it simply feels heavy. Very heavy. The cameras turned toward Jason Miller. The young man stood up slowly. He looked nothing like the confident receptionist from the day before. He looked humbled, human. Eleanor looked at him. "Jason," he swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. You will no longer work at the front desk." He nodded. "I understand," she continued, "but I won't throw your future away." He looked surprised. "Instead, you'll join our new community outreach program." His eyes filled with tears. "Why?" Eleanor smiled gently. "Because someone should have taught you sooner that a person's worth cannot be measured by what they wear." Jason lowered his head. For once in his life, he had no excuse, only responsibility. Then Eleanor addressed everyone. 20 years ago, they took my husband away from me." Her voice trembled slightly. "Not from weakness, from love. But today, I refuse to let them take away the future of innocent people." The room stood in complete silence. Then she continued. "We are not rebuilding a company." She pointed toward the employees. "We are rebuilding character." 6 months later, Sterling Financial looked completely different. The lobby had been redesigned. The reception desk was lower and accessible. The wheelchair ramp was heated during winter. Priority hiring programs now focused on older adults and people with disabilities. Every employee completed empathy training. Emily Carter had become Director of Community Experience. Benjamin Harper remained one of Eleanor's closest advisors. Jason now spent his days working with nonprofit organizations throughout Boston. The video from that morning remained famous, but Eleanor rarely watched it. She preferred looking forward. One snowy Monday morning, another elderly woman entered the building. She walked slowly with a cane. Her coat was worn. Her boots carried traces of snow. Years earlier, someone might have ignored her. Not anymore. A young employee immediately stood up. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" The woman smiled. "Thank you." No cameras recorded the moment. None were needed. 38 floors above, Eleanor sat beside a framed photograph of Samuel Brooks. She looked down into the lobby. She saw kindness. She saw patience. She saw the future. Outside, Boston continued moving as always, but inside Sterling Financial, something had finally changed. Eleanor gently touched the frame. Then she smiled. "We did it, Samuel." And for the first time in 20 years, she no longer felt like she was carrying the burden alone.